In this video, we discuss blockchain process. Blockchain technology is complex, and the exam boards state that you should understand blockchain in its basic form. For clarity, we'll abstract away a lot of the more complex processes in order to cover the essentials you need to be aware of for your exam. If you wish to know a bit more about this fascinating topic, feel free to watch the Beyond the Specification section at the end of this video. In its most basic form, a blockchain is a digital ledger that is a time-stamped series of records that cannot be altered. A traditional ledger is simply a book or collection of accounts in which transactions are recorded. Almost all cryptocurrencies store their ledger data in a data structure known as a blockchain. Now, the blockchain technique predates cryptocurrencies by almost 17 years and was described by researchers in 1991 as a method to timestamp digital documents so that it was not possible to backdate them or tamper with them. Although there are thousands of cryptocurrencies, we will use one of the first and arguably most famous, Bitcoin, as our reference for explaining blockchain technology. So a blockchain can be thought of like a daisy chain of data blocks. Each block can contain the details of thousands of transactions. Every so often, a new collection of transactions is packaged together in a block and added to the blockchain. The process of creating and adding a new block to the blockchain is called mining. Once a block has been added, it can't be removed or altered. If a correction is needed to a transaction, it would need to be reversed and added as part of a new block. People often wrongly refer to bitcoins being mined. They are not. New blocks are mined, and miners get rewarded for their effort by receiving bitcoins. Each block contains important details, so let's have a look at some of them now. We have a hash value. This is a unique value generated by cryptographic hashing algorithm. The value is generated from the data in the block. Therefore, even a minor alteration to the contents of the block will completely change the hash value. In this way, the hash value acts a bit like a digital fingerprint. Bitcoin uses the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. We also have the transaction data. So these are all the details of the transactions that have taken place and included in the block. They include the ID of a user making a payment, the ID of the user receiving the payment, and the value of that transaction. There's a timestamp, so that's the date and time the block was created. The block number. This is the number of the block in the blockchain sequence. And we also have the previous hash value. That's the hash value of the block preceding the current block in the blockchain. And this is how blocks are joined together to form a blockchain. Here we see a typical example of 4 blocks linked together to form a blockchain. Notice how each block is linked to the previous one by referring to its hash value. The first block in the chain is special in that it has no previous block pointer. This is known as the genesis block. Even a minor change to data in a block causes its hash value to become invalid. This hash value would need to be recalculated, causing the next block in the sequence to become unlinked. We could relink it by updating its previous block's hash value, but of course in doing so, the hash value of this block is now invalid, meaning it needs to be recalculated, thus breaking the link to the next block. Blockchains are also distributed. meaning that every person on a peer-to-peer network receives a complete copy of the blockchain. When a new block is created, a copy is sent to everyone on the network for verification. The distributed nature of blockchain further helps to maintain the integrity and trustworthiness of the data. So that's all the basics you need to know for the exam. Pause the video and take some notes. Now we really have just covered the basics there and abstracted some of the complexities away so you know exactly what you need for the exam. If you'd like to know a bit more about this fascinating topic, you can pop your pen down now and watch the rest of this video. So traditional currencies rely on a centralized banking system, typically controlled by a national organisation or government. The problem with any centralized banking system is being able to maintain security in this central entity. Cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin do away with this by introducing decentralization. As we know, cryptocurrencies use blockchain as their underlying technology, but for cryptocurrencies to be of any use, blockchain must offer, as a minimum, the same level of security as centralized banking systems, if not more. Blockchain provides, amongst others, three main techniques that we're going to discuss to maintain its security: cryptographic hashing, proof of work, and distributed verification. We'll look at each of these in turn. So we already know that a block contains a hash value calculated from the data in the block, as well as a link to the hash value of the block preceding it in the blockchain. Now this was actually an oversimplification. So here is the abstraction of a Bitcoin block we used earlier compared to a more accurate version on the right. Each block contains two hash values. There's the Merkle root, created by hashing all the transactions in the block, and also the previous block. That's the hash of the previous block's header. Now, as mentioned, Bitcoin uses the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. And here we see the hash value generated for the Merkle root, created by hashing all the transactions in the block. I'm using a great free little site here called CyberChef, and I've popped the URL in the bottom right-hand corner. Making even a minor change to the transaction data gives us a totally different hash value. Of course, because the Merkle root hash has changed and it's included in the header, it now means the previous root value of the following block will now be invalid, and its hash value will need updating in order to point back to this block. Bitcoin actually takes the hash value and then applies SHA-256 again. This means each block header has its own unique double SHA-256 fingerprint. To summarize, if we tamper with the second block, it will cause the hash of the second block to change also. That in turn makes the third block and all following blocks invalid, as the hash they now store for the previous block is invalid. Although using secure hashing algorithms such as SHA-256 and making them part of the linking process in the blockchain is a good start, it's not enough on its own to prevent tampering. After all, processing power today is so fast you could potentially tamper with a block, recalculate all the hashes of subsequent blocks, and create a whole new valid blockchain before the problem was discovered. This leads us into the second of our three major techniques which make blockchain technology so secure: proof of work. In simple terms, the hash generated needs to conform to a particular pattern to be acceptable. A proof of work is a repeat calculation to find an appropriate hash. Due to the nature of the pattern required for Bitcoin, it can take around 10 minutes for this proof of work to be completed. This also helpfully generates a delay in the process of creating a new blockchain. Now, if you want to tamper with any given block, you would need to recalculate the proof of work for all the following blocks. This process is policed by miners, other computers on the network carrying out these proof of work calculations. Only when the miners are successful with proof of work is a new block created and added to the chain. To encourage users of Bitcoin and other chain technology to carry out the essential process of proof of work, miners are rewarded in Bitcoins when a new block is created. With proof of work, only those blocks whose headers meet certain criteria will be accepted for adding to the blockchain. For a block to be accepted, the hash value of its header must be below a given number referred to as the difficulty target. The Bitcoin network automatically adjusts this target up and down according to how often new blocks pass the test, thus ensuring new blocks are only added about once every 10 minutes. Here we can see Bitcoin's block 1, the Genesis block, and it had a difficulty of 1. I'm using another free tool here called Blockchain Explorer, and again I've put the URL at the bottom of the screen. The latest block at the time of making this video had a much higher difficulty number. The fact the difficulty number is so much bigger is a reflection of how much harder it is to find a valid hash these days compared to when the Bitcoin blockchain first began, and that in turn is a reflection of the amount of miners currently on the Bitcoin network. We can see now the security of a blockchain technology comes from both creative use of hashing algorithms and this proof of work mechanism. But there remains one final important technique which makes blockchain technology so secure, and that's distributed verification. As mentioned in the main part of this video, when someone joins the network, they get a full copy of the blockchain. When a new block is created, it's sent to everyone on the network. Every node verifies the new block, and if it's happy, it adds a copy to their blockchain. Blocks that have been tampered with will be rejected by other nodes on the network. In this way, the distributed network maintains consensus on the valid version of the blockchain. They all agree as to which blocks are valid and which are not. This verification process, at its most basic level, works around one rule. If you receive two distinct updates to your blockchain with conflicting transaction data, then defer to the longest one, in other words, the one with the most proof of work put into it. As long as everyone in the peer-to-peer network agrees to give preference to whichever blockchain has the most work put into it, we have a mechanism which now supports decentralized consensus. This is the main way blockchain technologies are able to do away with a centralized authority such as those used by traditional banking systems. Let's pretend person A tries to send person B a tampered block, but doesn't send this to everyone else on the network. Now, to pull it off, person A would need to find a valid proof of work before all the other miners who are each working on their own blocks. Now, this is of course entirely possible. Person A could indeed get lucky and complete a valid proof of work before everybody else on the network. But you have to remember that person B is still listening out from broadcasts made by all the other miners. In order to keep fooling person B, person A would have to keep doing all the work needed to carry on adding blocks to this fraudulent fork in person B's blockchain, while at the same time hearing a different version of the chain from every single other person. Remember that our basic rule states that person B will trust the longest chain they know about. And while it might be feasible that person A can keep this up for a few blocks, the chance of them being able to continue to find a new valid block before the rest of the miners on the network combined becomes increasingly small. So to maintain the ruse, person A would need to gain control or have over 50% of the computing resources amongst all miners. This results in it becoming overwhelmingly likely that the blockchain all the other miners are working on grows quicker than the fraudulent blockchain being worked on by person A. Eventually, person B simply rejects what they're hearing from person A in favour of the longer blockchain. We can now see why blockchain technology is so secure. To successfully tamper with a blockchain, you need to tamper with all the blocks in the chain, redo the proof of work for each block, and take control of more than 50% of the peer-to-peer network to maintain consensus. This is virtually impossible to achieve on an established cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin. Now, before we finish with this video, I want to leave on some final thoughts. We know that mining involves completing a proof of work. Now, whatever the precise mechanism for a given cryptocurrency, this effectively means carrying vast amounts of mathematical computations out until a new block is discovered, with a successful miner being rewarded with newly minted tokens for their effort. In the case of Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies, this means producing different hash values again and again as quickly as they possibly can until a valid one is found. While graphical processing units are ideally suited to carry out these sort of repeated mathematical calculations, and indeed many hobbyist miners use graphics cards for Bitcoin mining. We can see here some of the most popular and powerful graphics cards at the time of making this video, and they produce a hash rate of over 100 million hashes per second. However, people have gone much further. An application-specific integrated circuit, or an ASIC, is a computerized device or piece of hardware that uses application-specific integrated circuitry for the sole purpose of mining Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency. In general, an ASIC is optimized to compute just a single function or set of related functions and do nothing else. Now, we can see from the table here, whereas the most powerful graphics card was able to perform hundreds of millions of hashes a second, some of the best ASICs can perform hundreds of trillions of hashes per second. It turns out there's a lot of performance gains that can be made when you design your integrated circuitry to do just a single task. So following the first Genesis block in Bitcoin, very early adopters could potentially mine several Bitcoins every day with nothing more than the background processing power of the standard computer's CPU. Today, obviously, the situation is very, very different, as we've said. There are specialist companies that have mining rigs consisting of thousands of processors, all working 24 hours a day. Worldwide, cryptocurrency mining also consumes a vast amount of electricity and generates a huge amount of e-waste. We've got a few facts here just to put it into perspective. In 2019, the Bitcoin network consumed 87 terawatts of electricity. That's the same as the annual electrical consumption of Belgium. 50% of Bitcoin is currently mined in China, and the country still is a heavy user of coal for electricity. Bitcoin's total carbon dioxide emissions was therefore around 60 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And the amount of electronic waste produced as a result of Bitcoin in terms of burnt out cards and other hardware is similar to that of a small European nation. And you've got to remember, all these facts I'm showing you here relate to Bitcoin. There's over 8,000 other cryptocurrencies, all which add to the environmental impact. So Bitcoin wastes a huge amount of energy as a result of its proof of work mechanism, which essentially requires all miners to pursue the same block until only one succeeds. Essentially, all the electricity used by the miners who are not successful goes to waste. Some more modern cryptocurrencies have started to move away from proof of work to a system which relies on proof of stake to verify transactions. These cryptocurrencies are much more carbon efficient. The problem is, these cryptocurrencies do not currently have the same popularity as Bitcoin. As the world at large becomes more aware of the impact of climate change and the impact of technology on carbon emissions, we have to hope that people start to invest in better solutions.